Let's say hello to a three-time NCAA champion, Naismith Basketball Hall of Famer, but most importantly, one of the greatest people you will ever meet on and off the court, the coach, Roy Williams. Coach Williams, welcome back to AT&T, and we say back, you've been here many times. We love having you. Your stories are so phenomenal, and I'm a little more prepared now because I know some of the answers, but I want to share some of these stories with the great folks here at Final Four Fan Fest, and to do that, we got to take it back to the beginning. Marion, North Carolina, Roberson High School, Coach Baldwin, your math teacher, so many of these important influences, and I'll never forget what you told me. You said, you know, times were hard, but I didn't know that. I didn't know we were poor. You didn't know that. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you for being here. Notice I am still wearing my North Carolina shoes, and we didn't get here, but we're going to be okay. We're going to be back. Yeah, when I grew up, my mom and dad split when I was very young for 7 years, and it was me and my mom and my sister. There was no car, no automobile in my family. When I went to college, I was the first person of my generation and to ever go to school. My sister didn't. My mother quit school in the 10th grade. My father quit school in the 6th grade. My father was an alcoholic, married 5 times. But I didn't realize, I thought it was okay because I had my mother. And my mother was the angel of the world. And she took care of me. And I had a basketball and a baseball, and I could do things like that. And my high school coach was incredible to me and still is to this day. I spoke to him yesterday. He's 84 years old. He's been in the hospital, and he's been operated on 17 times over the years, but he's still alive and kicking, and he's the reason that I became a basketball coach. He's the reason that I started to play in golf, and I ended up being a high school golf coach as well. And the third thing that he's responsible for, he's also one of 3 people that taught me how to shoot craps. And so my wife says he got you to be in coaching, he got you on the golf course, and he taught you how to shoot craps. According to my wife, he's 0 for 3, so she doesn't think he's very good, kind of thing. But no, he's extremely important to me. But my high school coach and then college coach, Dean Smith and Bill Guthridge, I was fortunate. I was able to coach for 48 years, and I was the luckiest guy in the world because never one time, and I wish that you could have this, not one time in my life did I ever say, I got to go to work tomorrow. And that's pretty doggone good right there. I never said that.
Absolutely, and we know why, and it helps to paint that picture as we continue that journey. And while you're at Roberson High School, in your book, Hard Work, I was fascinated by the moment when you talk about, well, here's a photo of me in my high school yearbook. I was voted most dependable, not most athletic. But you said over the course of time, you learned to appreciate that very much. And another very important time in your high school was, at that time, a friend by the lady, not the fish, named Wanda, who became the #1 teammate you've ever had.
My wife and I, Wanda, I call her Wicked Wanda. And when I first said that on a radio show, the fans at Kansas said, why would you do that? But she accepted it. That's her email address is Wicked Wanda, so it was okay. But last summer we had celebrated our 51st year. This year on July 28th will be 52. And I will tell you something very private, and I mean this. I don't want you to say anything about it. But since she's not standing here and you're not going to tell her, I'll tell her she's a lucky woman. Okay, so if she were here, or if I thought she was going to tell her, I wouldn't say that. But no, we've been together, and 2 children and 4 grandchildren, and as lucky as you can possibly be.
Absolutely, and when you talk about Wanda, we talk about your kids, and everything in this story always coordinates and correlates to North Carolina, whether it's your son playing for your daughter dancing at North Carolina. The connections are endless, and that's where you chose to retire fittingly. But before we even get to that chapter, we'll take it back to Owen High School, where it didn't always start off with more wins than losses in that record. 2-19 was the record at Owen High School. So you were ready. You understood that losing is a part of this game, and it's also a beyond the court part of life as well.
Yeah, how many people in here have read the entire Constitution of the United States? I have. Okay, because I looked, and I swear to goodness, I looked all the way through it, and not one place did I ever see that Roy Williams is supposed to win every game, because I thought it should be in there. And it's starting out, it was a little difficult kind of thing, and in fact, I'm doing this fall Anybody from North Carolina in here? You guys know where Drexel is? Okay, because Drexel High School is right off of Interstate 40, which I've traveled 8 million times from Chapel Hill to the mountains, or mountains to Chapel Hill. And every time we go up Interstate 40 and see that sign that says Drexel, I don't even know if I've told Nick this story, it gives me a warm, fuzzy feeling, because my first year as a high school coach, we went 2-19, and we beat Drexel's butt both times. Okay, and so the reason I even said something like this at another speaking engagement, that I said, I don't know what their coach is doing right now, but I've had a pretty good life. And so this fall, there's a fall celebration in Drexel, and I'm going back, and they're making T-shirts up. About every time I see the sign for Drexel, I get a warm, fuzzy feeling. So it's maybe
absolutely a friendly reminder to all the great things you've had and will continue to get. I think the coaching continues. You go, obviously, you stay right there, Chapel Hill, University of North Carolina, an opportunity to play on the freshman team, and then to come into interaction with the late, great coach, Dean Smith, who would forever change the trajectory of all things Roy Williams. You soaked up everything from Coach like a sponge, but he was also willing to disseminate all this information and experience to you. Tell us a little bit about that time working under one of the greatest to ever do it.
Well, it was funny because I'd been at Owen High School 5 years. I was down in Chapel Hill working the summer basketball camp, and Coach Smith I'd played on the freshman team. Coach Bill Guthridge, #1 assistant on the varsity, was my coach. And Coach Smith knew I wanted to coach because Coach Guthridge told him. So during college, I was always working. After I played freshman basketball, I had to make a decision, either get a job or drop out of North Carolina, because I didn't have enough money to stay. So I got a job in the end of my freshman year, sophomore, junior, senior, and graduate school. I worked 24 hours a week every week during college. But Coach Smith, I'd played on the freshman team. I became a referee and an umpire, an official, anything that you needed in the intramural office. But I did. I became known as the best basketball referee on campus. And in those times, in the early 70s, you had a lot of friction between the law school and the dental school and the black student movement and everything. And I always refereed all the championship games. And so Coach Smith asked me to come back at my last summer getting my master's degree and work basketball camp. And so I worked basketball camp, and then he thought I would be good enough my first year to put me in charge of a gym. And so he walked in one day and he said, "Who's Steve Brown?" I said, "Coach, that's him right over there." He said, "Who is Joe Blank?" And I'd say, "That's him over there." And he said, "You know everybody?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, who's Steve?" I said, "That's him over there." He said, you have 72 kids. And it was the second morning of camp, because I promised them that give me one full day with them in the gym, and I would get everybody's first and last name. And Coach Smith was really impressed by that. He said, "What if you miss it?" I said, "I've got to buy them an ice cream cone." And Coach, I don't have enough money to buy them an ice cream cone. So Coach Smith at that moment really enjoyed that part. And we had Phil Ford that we were recruiting. And he said, "I want you to work the pro gym the last week, because Phil Ford is our #1 prospect, and we need Phil at North Carolina. I want him to have a great camp experience." And Phil became the College Player of the Year and a great player for us. So I refereed at night in Phil's gym. And every time Phil drove to the basket, I called a foul on the other guy. And if Phil tried to take a charge, I always made sure he was called a charge. And at the end of the week, Phil had a great camp experience, and he ended up coming to North Carolina. And that really impressed Coach Smith. So after working the camp 5 years, he asked me to come back. And he was the most influential basketball person in my life. My mother, as I said, was the angel, and Coach Buddy Baldwin was the most influential male. But Coach Smith was the greatest coach of all time, and he was far better as a person than he was as a basketball coach. So I had the best teacher that you can possibly have.
Much like you as well, Coach. The same could be easily said about you. And you talk about that journey. You were part of many important recruitings, including one guy by the name of Michael Jordan. Rare air. You were critical in that landing of Michael Jordan to come to Chapel Hill. the rest we already know what happens. But then, believe it or not, there was one time you leave Chapel Hill, you leave your great state of North Carolina, you go to Lawrence, Kansas, and you did everything you could for that program. You built so many amazing teams, and you got so close 2 different times knocking on the door. And while you were there was going to be an opportunity to come home. But at that same time, you also made a promise. So tell us about the call to come home and also about that promise.
Well, I was very fortunate. I was Coach Smith's assistant for 10 years. And Coach Smith came to my office and said, just hang on because I think you'll have a chance at the Kansas job at the end. And I thought he was crazy. I went home and told my wife I think Coach Smith had been drinking or something. But so eventually I did become the coach at Kansas because of Coach Smith's input. And for me, it was a great, great place. Basketball was the most important thing going on, especially in the wintertime and the cold breeze blowing through Kansas. But we had a good run. And after my 12th year, North Carolina called and asked me to come back. And I struggled because we had a freshman named Nick Collison. And Nick Collison was the freshman of the year in the Big 12 and just a great young man, a great family. And when I was recruiting him, an opposing school told Nick, he said, you're going to go to Kansas and play for Roy Williams. He's not going to be there. He's going to go back to North Carolina to be the coach. And so during the recruiting, I told Nick, I said, I'm going to be at Kansas longer than you're going to be at Kansas. So when North Carolina came back and offered me the job in 2000, Nick was a freshman. And he had a great freshman year for us, and we were going to have a really good team. And I was trying to figure out how I could tell Nick that I was leaving, and I couldn't do it. And I remember going back and visiting Chapel Hill and meeting with Coach Smith and the athletic director, and that still the Nick Collison question was one that I couldn't figure out how to answer it. And so my wife and I, Wanda, we got up on the last morning we were there. We came in one morning, had dinner with Coach Smith and the athletic director and did some things. And then the next morning I said, let's go walk around campus. We had a famous tree called the Davy Poplar. And I said, as we're walking, if the Davy Poplar falls over, that'll be a sign that I can tell Nick that I'm leaving. Well, the Davy Poplar didn't fall over. So I couldn't leave Nick Collison because I'd promised him. And it was, I just couldn't do it. And so I had to tell North Carolina, I had to tell Coach Smith no. And that was the hardest thing I'd ever had to do. But I think deep down inside he was proud because of the reason that I'd said no. Well, 3 years later, we had changed athletic director, and I didn't nearly have the relationship with my athletic director that I had before. And secondly, Nick Collison was a senior. And we had just lost the national championship game to Syracuse in New Orleans, and that was on Monday night. And on Tuesday morning, they fired the athletic director trying to get me to stay. But on Wednesday, I decided to go back to North Carolina because I had fulfilled my promise to Nick Collison at that time. And it worked out great.
It worked out phenomenal. Not only did you get that call to come home, you did it replacing your mentor, the great Dean Smith. So to have that full circle moment and then to continue with that greatness and cut down the nets 3 times, to sit back and let it sink in, realizing that your whole life was leading up to that moment. In fact, one shining moment when you really took it in. What was that like the first, second, and third time it happened?
Well, my 3 favorite cities in the country, seriously, St. Louis, Detroit, and Phoenix, period, because we won 3 championships, all those 3 cities. But the first national championship was in St. Louis, and we had a great team. We played Illinois in the championship game. They were ranked number 1 in the country. We were ranked number 2, and it was a great game. We ended up winning. I sent word and got somebody to bring Coach Smith down the locker room, and I said, you can bring that guy with you if you want to. And so that guy with him was Michael. And so Coach Smith and Michael Jordan came in the locker room in 2005. And I stood up and said after they got there that North Carolina basketball was Lenny Rosenbluth and 57 national championship and Dean Smith and Michael Jordan. But now It will also be Sean May, Raymond Felton, and Marvin Williams going around the room. But having Coach Smith and Michael in the locker room after the first national championship was the neatest thing to me. And it was far better than 2016. 16, we lost the national championship game on the last second shot by Villanova. Chris Jenkins made a big shot that beat us. And so I'm crushed. I mean, we were down 10 with 4 minutes to play and tied the game on the most miraculous shot I've ever seen a player make when Marcus Page tied the game up, but they made one at the buzzer to beat us. And I'm sitting down outside the locker room trying to decide in my brain what I'm going to go say to my kids. And I'm just sitting there, and I'm out of it. And somebody came and put their arms around me and hugged me, and I didn't know who it was, and I turned around, and it was Michael. And Michael said, I just came here to see how you were doing. And I said, Michael, I feel so inadequate because I don't know what to say to my players. And I said, would you go in there and just tell them how proud you are of them? And he said, yes. So Michael goes walking in, and I come walking in behind him. And our best player that made the most miraculous shot I'd ever seen was Marcus Page. And Marcus told me this story later. It was really cute. He said that, Coach, I had my head in the towel, and I saw it as I walked by, and he was crying, but he had his face and his head in the towel. And he said, I heard this voice talking, and all of a sudden I realized that wasn't your voice. And he said, I dropped the towel a little bit, and I thought, oh, my gosh, there's Michael Jordan in our locker room talking to us. And so that was a neat thing. And then, fortunately, we were able to get it in 2009 with Tyler Hansbrough and his group, and 2017 after losing the heartbreaker in 16.
And even when you hung up the clipboard, it wasn't done because North Carolina will always be home. 7 figures of donations, something you would never advertise, but the fact is, and it goes to a multitude of different things in Chapel Hill, the University of North Carolina, your connection will ever ring true there, as will your legacy, as it will live forever in the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame. Amongst greatness, you've kept company with presidents, dignitaries, some of the greatest basketball talent and human beings on earth. And now you're going to get to say hello to these fine fans here in San Antonio at the Final Four. AT&T, give it up for the coach, the legend.
Thank you. Thank you.
Humility, greatness is about to be bestowed upon you. It's time to say hello to Coach Roy Williams.